when we went on lockdown, and we were exploring ways that we can still engage and bring conversation to campus whilst we are away. We've had several versions last semester and this semester, and we've spoken about several topics from sexual misconduct at home to various health topics that has been really, really useful in preparing and equipping us to navigate the COVID pandemic. Today, once again, we bring to you another exciting conversation, and I'm excited, especially about the panel, but also because the topic that we're going to talk about today, it's something that most people who've had to navigate various cultural spaces have had to deal with, right? I remember talking about it, and I mean, the number of hands up that I got, yeah, I can relate to that. I can relate to that from several people, right? So tonight we are hoping that we would have a rich discussion, but also walk away with some skills that we can navigate these spaces and this conversation as we step out there to be the best versions of ourselves. So what is the topic, right? We're going to talk about how do we talk about our achievements when we are brought up in cultural spaces that does not promote self-advocacy, talking about yourself, self-promotion, right? If you're coming from a cultural space that has imbibed in you the whole notion about humility, about not sticking out of the ordinary, about communal living and communal, existence and achievement, when you then switch to an environment where you have to now self-advocate and promote the skill set that you can bring to the conversation, it becomes a bit of a daunting task. And I'll share my own experience. So today, I call my reporting, my immediate report boss, Dean Abdul, right? When I have to send an email, I call him boss, I call him sir, and I know he's on the call. Don't think that, I do that because I want to do that, but because I just can't. I just can't bring myself to call him, Abdul. Although Ashesi, it's a cultural environment that we promote that. I mean, we call our President Patrick, and that's such a heavy name for me sometimes, right? To remove that title. And so how do we navigate these spaces? My name is Dr. Millicent J. I'm the director of the Office of Diversity and International Programs, the office that situates, most of our cross-cultural engagements on campus. And this evening, I'm joined by a really rich combination of panelists. And if our panel can put on their videos so we can see you, I'll begin by introducing and we shared their bios. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into details beyond their titles. And then we'll delve right into the conversation. Just a little bit of housekeeping also, that we use our chat, our Q&A box to put all our questions as the panelists, make their submissions. And so I have the singular honor to introduce Dr. Judith Ainsworth, and she's the Regional Vice President, Eastern U.S. Association for Business Communication. She's a professor at McGill University and currently a visiting professor at Ashesi University. So Judith, if you can give us a wave so we can know which of you is Judith.
Yes.
Awesome, awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Dr. Achei.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Next, we have Mr. Niato Bentelencho, and he is a founder and head coach of Avenir Careers. Ni, if you can give us there we go. There we go. Thank
What's up?
you.
What's good, everybody? Hope you're all doing well. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Awesome, Ni. And then we have our own Jessica, Alice, Sugru, and Jessica and I go way back. We've shared several experiences together, right from her time at Ashesi. So she's a proud alum It's always exciting to welcome you back into our community, Jessica. Jessica currently holds the role of Chief Operating Officer, Global Regulatory and Cross Global Banking and Market Strategic Initiative. Whoa, what a big title, Jessica, at Bank of America. But Jessica has also, in her previous role, for a long time held the role of a recruiter for Africa, right? And I know we've engaged severally. So Jessica, welcome back.
Thank you. It was good to be back.
Awesome, awesome. And then finally, we have Mr. Emmanuel Alex Osiedu. He's also a household name at Ashesi because he's adjunct faculty. But he doubles in the role of managing director at Stanbic Investment Management Service in Ghana. So Alex, you're also welcome. Awesome, awesome. You're all welcome, and I'm hoping that with your rich experiences, we will walk away tonight with a lot of excitement, but most importantly, a lot of skill sets to navigate this conversation when we have to deal with it out there. So let's get right into it, right? And I would love to begin with Judith. I'm a scholar practitioner, so I believe in the scholarship informing the practice and the practice informing the scholarship, right? Not just the doing, but the science behind the doing. And so if you can just set us off in the conversation by helping us understand what the literature says about the dynamics of communicating across cultures, right? And then how does culture impact the way we talk about our accomplishment, especially when we are networking with people we want to make an impression on? Because bottom line, this whole thing is about communication, right? Whether we communicate or we don't communicate, whether we do it effectively or we don't do it effectively. What does the research say about this?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Millicent, for great introduction and these questions. So I'm going to, when I talk about the research first, I'm going to go back to the early research on communicating across cultures, and then I will talk about some more recent research as well. So the early research on the dynamics of communicating across cultures is most often based on studies that were carried out in the 1960s and the 1970s. And this work emphasized the existence of and the importance of cultural differences across national borders. So the concepts of cultural differences and contexting or cultural contexts have simply become integral parts of cross-cultural management studies. And this is what we find in most of the courses that we teach in communication management studies. So they are the most common frameworks used to explain these differences between business communication styles across cultures. So what is this framework? Many of you probably know this, but the framework explains cross-cultural variation that ranks cultures along a continuum from low context to high context. So let's take a look first at what it means to be a low context culture. So in low context cultures, information is less widely shared and requires less cultural awareness because it's obviously shared between fewer people. Low context cultures emphasize change and mobility. Communication is primarily task oriented. So let's get the job done as quickly, directly, and efficiently as possible. Low context cultures prefer formal information networks, and they tend to employ much more linear thinking. So as a result, people in these low context cultures are very comfortable when talking about achievements, promoting themselves, selling themselves to others. So just to give a few examples of these low context cultures, well, that would be the United States, parts of Europe, not all European countries, but parts of Europe. This is where communication is much more direct and explicit. So now at the opposite end of the continuum, we have the high context cultures. And the high context cultures, information is widely shared, and that means it requires much more cultural awareness because you're sharing this information amongst many more people or cultures. So high context cultures emphasize stability, communication, and I love communication. This is my background. Communication is an art form. It displays sophistication, nuance, cultural identity. So high context cultures appreciate slower, more indirect messages and use informal information networks. So, and in addition, they do tend to employ much more holistic thinking, which is quite the opposite of what I said with the low context cultures being much more linear when they think. So some examples of high context cultures are Latin America, Asia, China, Japan, for example, and Africa, of course, where we are at the moment. Well, where many of us are at the moment. So this communication tends to be much more indirect and implicit. So moving on to the more recent research over the last 15, 20 years. This research has challenged this model of having this dichotomy of high context and low context, and particularly when it's related to business and management technology studies and fields. So what the trends are pointing to at the moment is that we should be adopting low context communication practices, even in our so-called high context cultures. Everything is becoming more homogenized, right? This is all probably because of modernization and globalization. It's increasingly creating low context business culture across the world. So this trend, as I said before, focuses on direct, precise, persuasive management and interpersonal communication styles. So you want to be persuasive when you're talking about yourself. And as we use more and more technology, we tend to rely less and less on these contextual or on these cultural cues. Technology doesn't do a very good job of transmitting culture. Not on its own, that's for sure. And the final thing I want to say is because English is more and more, it's being adopted as the global business language, then this low culture communication can be expected to be more and more important all the time because cultural style is often, or most often, most likely linked to language as well. This is what the studies have shown anyways. Even if you do tend to speak another language, if your first language is something else, your first language culture tends to come through in when speaking a second language. So just to conclude this part, with the trends in the homogenization of low context, okay, then it's really going to start challenging the implications for high context cultures. So I can move on to the second question. There was about how this impacts our ability to talk about our accomplishments when networking, particularly when networking, we want to present ourselves in the best possible light to make the best possible impression. So as I was saying, the trends toward a much more homogeneous, low context workplace culture, it's going to be problematic for high context cultures such as Ghana. In this type of culture, and I'm reiterating somewhat what Millicent said when she introduced the panel. This type of culture, people are humble, modest. They don't feel comfortable promoting themselves, being flashy, talking about their accomplishments and saying, gee, what a wonderful job I did on that. Because this is, it's just seen as self-promoting. Self-selling, self-promoting, and it's contrary to the cultural norms. So, for example, related to this cultural context style, if you were to provide too much information and talk about your achievements and talk about all the great accomplishments you had, this would be considered boasting and even talking down to others. So, in this cultural context, it really inhibits people from advocating and promoting themselves. Now, on the other hand, in low context cultures, elaborating on achievements is considered being very thorough. And it's actually expected behavior. Okay, people in low context cultures or people who relate to low context cultures are expected to self-promote, to sell themselves. So in this way, we can see that the dynamics of communicating across low context and high context cultures can be challenging, can create barriers for certain cultural groups who are not familiar with the other type of communication. So it's important to know the cultural context style of different cultures, whether it's high context, low context, somewhere along that continuum, and to be proactive, adapt to the context you're in. So definitely you want to prepare ahead of time when you're at a networking event or when you're going to an interview or in the workplace at all. Prepare for it, learn about the other culture, but also your own culture. What are the similarities? What are the differences? Okay, how could we find maybe a common ground? So do prepare ahead of time, know what strategies to adopt so that you can make the best impression, that you can have the best possible networking outcome.
Awesome, awesome. And I'm not gonna let you go yet, Judith. I'm just curious, what role does gender play in all of this? Do you find that it's further gendered in any way, or it doesn't matter at all? It's just either high or low or in between somehow. Does this make any difference at all, whether we are dealing with the male who tend, naturally to want to do that, as opposed to our females who, naturally may not want to do that? What does the research say, or what has your experience been?
Yeah. So I worked with a fourth-year student last summer, and we did some research on this. And we actually looked at the CEOs of the same company. So it was a woman CEO, and she had just, she'd been CEO for many years. I forget how many years, but she stepped down, and there was a new CEO, and it was a man. So we compared the letters from the annual reports from the year, her final year and his first year. And one of the students was very, very interested in this. And he actually counted up the number of times that the woman, the female CEO, used I, and compared to the number of times that the male CEO used I when writing this letter. And it was just fascinating how the female used I so fewer, many, much fewer, much less, and tended to use the we, and tended to use the, the collaborative we instead of, and this is the CEO of a huge, huge multinational company, by the way.
Wow.
One of the largest in the world. Yeah. Now I could say, I don't know whether it's cultural or not, because the head office is in the United States, but she is Indian background, but she was educated in the United States and had lived in the United States for many, many years. And the new CEO, actually, he's not originally American either. So, but it was fascinating, this study, to see how the male even self-promoted in the letter to shareholders.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that initial, opening, fascinating research, but fascinating situating this whole conversation in the literature and the work that has been done, the studies that's been done before. Thank you for sharing. I'm gonna go right ahead and move on to Niatu, and then you've had the opportunity to live in multiple spaces and had multiple experiences, right? You're Ghanaian, you were born in London, you came to do a little bit of school in Ghana, you're now in the US and you work there, right? So you had multiple, and you work in the space of careers. How does someone, Judith has done a beautiful job situating the science or the research behind it, but in practice, how does someone who has been raised and cultured and socialized to live in such a low context culture manage to navigate practically, right? And I read your article. You did an amazing job talking about
Thank
your
you.
experience on that in that LinkedIn article, which caught my attention actually, about your own experience. Share with us practically how this has, I mean, how you've navigated these spaces, and what would you say will be the most significant thing to do to reconcile your culture, your culture, which wouldn't go away, plus this world, which Judith is telling us that this is how we have to be able to survive.
Right. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and a great, introduction by Judith. Before I dive into answering your question directly, I just want to dovetail very quickly off this, the last bit of your conversation with Judith around the male-female difference, and just to introduce that it's a socialization, perhaps a bit more than natural inclination or nature, in that men are socialized to be more chest thumping, to have the freedom or the drive to communicate and be more confident and bold in how they talk about themselves. And women are socialized to be a bit more demure and be deferential and spread credit, even if they don't have to. So I just want to introduce that socialization piece and not necessarily have it seen as a natural result of being born male or born female. And just also the fact that personality plays a role as well. I myself am someone who both by nurture and by nature, I'm a bit more of a humble person. Playing soft football growing up, I always had more assists than goals because I loved orchestrating. I didn't necessarily have to be up front. That's just my personality. And so that's also a mitigating factor that can influence how all of us interact, whether it's networking, interviewing, and how we go about our lives day to day. So just wanted to introduce that piece before jumping into my answer. Then when it comes to navigating the professional waters as someone raised in a humble cultural context, let me first start by saying that it's a work in progress. After this conversation, we don't expect you to just turn on a light switch and you'll be able to self-promote right away. For myself, I'm work in progress as we all are, in terms of gaining more comfort in talking about my own achievements and my own, my own bragging rights, as it were. And so that being said, give yourself permission to see this as a journey and not an instant switch you need to make right away. And that, even though I did grow up abroad, I was born in London, I grew up for the most part in the United States, I finished high school in Ghana. The cultural values I was raised with are very powerful because my mom and dad instilled them in me, regardless of not being within Ghana. And so I carry those with me to this day. And so when it comes to thinking about how to navigate this thing better, I had 3 ideas in terms of how to support all of us in this realm. Number 1 would be to identify a culturally relevant source of motivation. And so going back to Judith's discussion about high context versus low context, I'm going to add on the layer of collectivist versus individualistic cultures. And so in Ghana, we are collectivist. In many African, Asian, and Latinx societies, they're collectivist in nature. So the major psychological unit is the group, whether it's your family, whether it's your ethnic group or your national identity, that's who you identify with first. And so when it comes to motivation, you might be more motivated to perform well in school or in work for your family, for your parents, for your group. And so if you're able to latch onto a natural source of motivation that is culturally relevant, being that group unit, that is a way that you can find the energy, if you like, to promote yourself in order to advance, to support your group. And so, for example, many of you are international studying in Ghana. You're the international students, but maybe you're repping for Kenya, repping for, Egypt, I don't know, but that's who you're representing whilst you're in at Ashesi, trying to do your best and advance yourself for your cultural and national identity, and of course for your family as well. And that might be what's motivating you and spurring you forward day by day. The second thought that came to me was looking at self-promotion as a means to an end. And so if we logically follow from, I'd like to do well because my parents invested a lot of time and money and resources in me, my group, is who I'm riding for or what have you, then the end is getting a job that will allow you to support your family, to make your psychological unit proud of you in whatever shape or form that takes for you. And so if you see promotion as a means to an end, it might feel like a more healthy way for you to incorporate it into your way of being as you move forward and navigate the professional job search and the professional world, that you're doing it for someone else, your family, what have you. The third thing that I thought of is the fact that, you know, I'm remembering in high school in Ghana, this is me acclimatizing to living at home for the first time at any length. And, you know, I would never forget, you know, people, flowing fans to someone, right? And like, oh, I'm shy, right? That's like the default, you know, Ghanaian response when someone starts getting a lot of giving someone a lot of compliments. And so we're semi-comfortable with someone else talking about us for us and boosting us up that way, but we're not comfortable doing it ourselves. So the thing to remember in the job search, you cannot do job search by proxy. You can't bring your boys, your girls into the room with you to advocate on your behalf and tell your story. It's you one-on-one, you know, with the interviewer or you with the panel, and you can't have your friends speak on your behalf. And so even though culturally we are conditioned to be more comfortable with others speaking for us when it comes to our achievements, we have to start to modify that because they can't hire you and your friends, they can only hire you. And so that's what we need to start wrapping our minds around in terms of how to navigate this. So again, identify culturally relevant piece of motivation for you, which might be your family unit, see motivation as a means to an end. And just very quickly to make that come to life, I had a client who was worried about self-advocating for a raise after she got a promotion. And she was thinking, I'm being greedy, I'm being selfish. And then I helped her see that, well, if you made more money, you'd be able to support your family better. That's when the light bulb went off. Oh, this isn't just about me, it's about my family as well. And I gave her the reframe she needed in order to go forward and advocate for her increased salary with her employer.
Hmm. Hmm. I think in a way you've answered my second question partially, but as I listen to you, you know, Ghana, we have something we call being too known, right? And
Yep.
so where do you draw the line between self-advocating,
Mm-hmm.
talking about it to be able to get the means that you are aiming for, and bragging, being seen as someone who is just bragging about, you know, what they've been able to achieve and flouting it, which culturally it's looked of, it's not acceptable, right, to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
where do you really draw the line?
Right. I think that context is really important. The difference between bragging and speaking plainly or factually is the context. So when no one's asking you, that's when you're too known. But when you're actually directly being asked, well, what have you done that will make you worthy or make you, you know, merit you being hired? That's when your achievements are then relevant in that context. And so I have a few reframes I'll share now to help navigate this better. So number one, you're playing by the rules of the game. When you're interviewing for any company, the question you're being asked implicitly and explicitly is, why should we hire you? And so in order to respond to that question, you need to give them the benefits, the impact, the positives of you coming on board. Um, if I want to be silly, you know, and thinking about products, you are the product. And so you have to market yourself well. If you're, you know, an iPhone versus an Android user, iPhone is like, oh, you know, we're all right. You know, we're okay as a product. You know, you should buy us over Android or Android doing the opposite. To make them more local, if we're talking about the jollof wars, you know, is Nigeria going to be like, oh, our jollof's okay, you should eat, not, you know, you should eat Ghanaian jollof, or Ghana's like, oh, Nigerian jollof is better. You know, neither of us are going to do that. And so if, you know, we're going to ride so hard for things like that, whether it's, you know, a product that you use or food you consume, for your own self, if you want someone to buy, you know, in effect, which is your salary, you want to promote yourself in an effective way that will entice them to do so. And so those are the rules of the game. They can objectively assess your fit and your value by understanding your achievements that you bring to the table. So that's why you should and can talk about it without boasting. Secondly, your achievements are the product of your own hard work. If a fireman puts out the fire, who gets the credit? Is it the fire hose or is it the fireman, right? And so you're not going in there to give someone else the credit for the work that you did. If you, for example, saved your company $1,000, if you executed an engineering project at Ashesi that, you know, increased the efficiency of some sort of process, you did that. And therefore you have every right to take credit for that work, and you should do so. It's allowed, it's okay. Then thirdly, your achievements are facts. if you, again, saved $1,000, if you made $25 million in sales, that is a fact. But if the fact happens to make you look good, that's okay. And that's what, so that's what you're really being asked to do. Give us the facts of what you've done that will contribute to our understanding of how it can help us in this job.
Awesome.
And then finally, I'd say that a way to culturally approach this is thinking about how your achievements helped others. And so if our orientation as collectivist, individuals from our cultures is that the group, the family is the great unit, our goal usually is to help our unit. And so when you're working, your achievements always benefit somebody. They don't necessarily benefit just you. So this could be your coworkers, this could be your superiors, this could be your clients or your consumers. Someone is going to benefit in some way, shape, or form from your work. And so that's another way to feel more psychologically aligned when talking about your achievements, because you helped someone else. And therefore you can put those forward as a way to help your employer or prospective employer see if you're going to be a good fit. And so those are some of the ways that I can think of in terms of reframing things to be more culturally aligned and feel less artificial or forced when asked to speak about achievements.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much, Neat. I think this will be a nice point to turn the conversation over to Jessica. And Jessie, how, as a former recruiter, how have you seen this play out, right? You are Ghanaian, you have been socialized here, and then you get to work with a multinational company situated outside of this cultural environment where they value, the high context, right, culture. And I'm just curious to know, how have you seen this play out at the recruitment process? How have you seen students exhibit some of these conversations? And as a recruiter, what would you advise them to do to have that sweet dance, between making a case for themselves when they have to, without the feeling of, this is not who I am, which ultimately will go against them, right? And so I'm interested to hear how you've seen this play out during the recruitment process.
No, definitely. And it's quite interesting to hear Nee talk about some of the ways in which you can sort of reframe it, because a lot of them are aligned to some of the things I'm saying. In terms of the recruiting process, the areas in which I see there's a lot, and I can talk about my own personal experience later on. But there are three main areas. So obviously, right before you get called on to be interviewed, during the interview process, and then obviously when you are on the other side as well. The first thing, by virtue of the role that I used to do, I only just moved in a couple of months ago. We would, run recruiting roadshows across the continent, because that's the focus that I was looking at, but also I did the same in the UK. And one of the things I noticed, even when we do our roadshows to sort of market as an organization of choice, when we get to the recruitment events, obviously we ask students to bring their CV and we can run through some of it with them. One of the things I would notice a lot is people, and both male and female actually, their CVs were, again, I think Nee had mentioned this, a few people would put we did things. So if they were trying to sort of explain what they did in a particular role, they would say we instead of I. And even within that context, they would just, state what they've done versus the value that they bring up on board. And so the ways in which I would usually sort of suggest people do that, because before you can even get into the door, your CV or your cover letter, or whatever that is that they're asking, a motivational letter, is your way of saying, hey, I'm the product that you're looking for, right? And so you have to be able to sell yourself from there. So it's really important that at the very beginning, in terms of, whether you're submitting a CV or cover letter, you're thinking about what value do I bring on board? And then what value, it's what you bring on board, not what the team brings on board. In situations where it's a team achievement, I would always say it's, always indicate what you contributed. And I think going back to Nee's point, it's a matter of fact. That's what you did, right? So if you're going to think about it, oh, will they think that I'm, doing this, or I'm bragging, for lack of a better word? No, because we're looking to see, okay, we've setting competencies that we want to see, and so we want to see that you have those skill sets. And until you say that, we wouldn't be able to know. And it's critical, because that's what would decide when you get to the next step of meeting the employer in an interview setting. So if you go into the next stage of the assessment process, one of the things that I've seen as well is people that are students that, because I dealt with a lot of entry level sort of roles, students that came from Ghana, Nigeria, and even the Ghana, Nigeria, there's a little bit of difference there as well that I'll point out, is that during the interview process, again, you have to probe deeper to be able to get information. And it was a little bit better with males, because again, to Nee's point of view, you're socialized. Males are socialized to talk about the things that they do, and they're very proudly would say that. What you find with females in interviews, when you ask them to talk into detail about the exact things that they did, sometimes they find it difficult to actually, communicate what they did, not because they didn't do it, because outside of the interview, if you had a one-on-one conversation with them, they would be able to sort of, somehow be able to communicate that as well. So that's another area that you would see. The other thing when it comes to assessments and group exercises is that one of the things that I noticed was, and I think a lot of recruiters noticed again, where the females would tend to be much more quieter because they don't want to be, demure, want to, not overshadow the others, and the male naturally would easily talk about their roles, or talk about the context of what we're asking. They would rather be the person taking the notes, or the person timekeeping. But every now and then, if they did say a point, you would realize that the point was really strong. So being able to understand that context. So one of the things that we would do was, prior to the interview prep, trying to let them know that at the end of the day, in a group exercise, we're assessing you as individuals. And so you want to make sure that you are selling yourself in the interview, and selling yourself not in the way that you're undermining other people in the interview process, but just, again, stating what you did. So once you get onto the job, the other part is navigating your early years. And classic case is promotion. I would use myself as an example. I remember getting into the job, and the whole context of put my head down, do the work, and then hopefully people will notice in the UK. And the first year I was like, nobody's noticing, come on, is anyone going to say anything? But what I found out with my other colleagues were that they naturally, some of the British colleagues and American colleagues that I had found ways to be able to tell the manager what they were doing on a daily basis. I found it a bit cringeworthy to send an email to my manager at the end of the week to say, hey, this is what I've done. I'm like, he would know about it already. Why do I need to do that? But having to learn that just from a context of this culture here was a bit of a shock. And again, I'm still in the process of learning it. But that's one of the things that you find is advocating for yourself for promotion. Everything seems like, oh my God, I'm selfish. I should be grateful that I have a job. Especially if you moved here. I think the first year I was like, oh, some of my friends who are doing the national service are not getting paid what I'm getting paid. So, okay, I'm just going to keep quiet and not do anything. But you have to sort of reframe that. And it's a rewiring of your mindset. It takes a long time, but it's like the little steps that you can do. I think the second part of your question, I don't know if you can repeat that for me.
I think you've answered it quite a bit. The gender part was the second question, but I have another one for you before I move on to Alex. And I think you gave a little bit, but I want you to, after the job, you spoke quite a bit about the entry point, and I think Neat touched on just a little bit. When you've gotten the job finally, right, and you're working on teams, sometimes also the way you communicate your achievement, it's sometimes a game changer, right? And so I see it a lot with students, right? Where we put them in teams and group work, they will do the work. And then later on as faculty, you find out that it's only one student who actually did all the work. But that student wouldn't speak up and say that I did the work. My friends really didn't contribute, right? Just because we are not wired like that. So it gets transferred to the job where, how do you advocate yourself for yourself when you've done a good job, where that advocating would actually contribute to that promotion or that raise in salary, or you moving on to your next stage, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that when you finally are on the job?
I think I think what I'll see some of the things that have worked for me. I think one way to do that is, again, just tell people what you're doing. And whether that is, and again, context is important. You need to understand your team dynamics. How does your manager like to communicate? And that's one of the things I always say, like the first time I'm meeting my manager, when I get onto, when I joined, thankfully I got advice before doing that, was to say, excited to join the team here. I just wanted to understand how you want, you would like to communicate with me. Is it like a weekly, bi-weekly? And in terms of, the work that I do, would you, like updates monthly? And then make sure that you do it. So whether it's putting time in the diary to do that or just sending an email, where you've worked with people on a team, again, I would always say, once you send the update calls or update emails, also just in there say your personal contribution. And one of the things that I had to learn to do was also ask the other people that I've worked with to give a good word. If they basically, if they think I did a good job and they told me directly, I'd say, let my manager know. I wasn't doing that the first couple of years because I thought, oh, why would I, the fact that it's been done and done, well, case closed. But that's you building a network of people that would, again, help your case when it gets to promotion, because it's not just what you're producing your team, but how are people outside of your team seeing you, not just for your own personal good, but for the good of the person that leads the team as well. So those are the two ways that I would say that you can do that in the working world. And when it comes to also annual reviews and performance appraisals, most of the time you have to submit an individual appraisal. I remember my very first year, I pretty much just put like 5 bullet points down on my appraisal. And then I realized that thankfully, I had a good relationship with one of the other analysts on my team. And I just said, obviously new organization, what are you putting on? And which started telling me the things. I was like, wait, I did that with you. I should really put that on there, because I didn't, like, to me, I just thought, okay, it's fine. They saw that throughout the year, but these are the 5 things I'm going to talk about. And I was concentrating more on the last 3 months versus talking about everything we've done from January. So just getting that context from someone else to say, hey, and hearing from another person what they were putting on theirs, just got the light bulb up, and I thought, okay, I need to do a little bit better. And I think since then, you get a little bit more intentional when you tailor it. I've had different managers who want your appraisal to look different ways. So again, ask the question, and also just make sure that you put it there. I think that's the only thing I can say, because it's a fact. If you didn't do it, then obviously then don't put it there. But if you actually did it and it's produced the results, why not put it on there? And to Nee's points, if you're thinking, if that's the end results is eventually I'm going to get a raise or get promoted, and it means my salary is going to increase and I can help my family, then why not? Why are you not putting that on there? Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Context. I've heard over and over and over again that context is everything, right? And so Alex is going to help us situate it within the context of our typical Ghanaian African context, where we are training most of our students, right? Now, Alex, you've seen both worlds. You've been able to navigate both worlds out there, and then when you're back. But the beauty is you've also seen Ashesi students, right? In the classroom and on the job field. And I'm curious to find out, when you have to navigate between, these two contexts, and you have to do the sweet dance, right? One thing that really a couple of years ago got me really thinking, and we get a lot of feedback about Ashesi students are so proactive, they are in your face, they are this, they are that, right? And if we listen to everything that is being told, that is the script that we are supposed to follow. That's the script that the students are following. If they want to end up with, Jessica at Bank of America, she has to advocate for herself. She has to talk about herself, right? I was really intrigued at one career services where I was sitting on a personal branding competition, and a student presented himself very, very articulate, but has also achieved a whole lot where he did that. I mean, the contest was personal branding. We had two employees who were excited, and then it got to the Ghanaian employer, right? Who, I mean, the feedback was that this is what we've been talking about. He's too boastful. Look at how he's talking about, look at the way he's even saying it, right? You've done this, you've done this. He could have even said it in a better way. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I know this kid. Everything that he said, it's a fact. I didn't see anything wrong with how he said it. And so we've had several incidents where people get bent, right? If they are to exhibit this proactive, attitude in our traditional African context. How do they navigate and do this code switching to know when I'm supposed to do it this way and when I'm supposed to change it because of the context? Over to you.
Well, thanks, Millicent, and thank you all for inviting me here. It's a difficult balancing job, really, doing the code switching thing. I'll share a quick story before I share with you what I think the solutions are. So I work for a large bank, and there were we're doing this graduate recruitment. So HR went through, human resources went through the process, and there were two top stars that the bank wanted to recruit. And so I was asked, together with another senior person, to make the call. One of them was from Ashesi, and the other was from good old University of Ghana, Lagos. And my story just puts everything all of you have mentioned, spoken about in context. When the Ashesi gentleman came to me, he ticked all the boxes. Assertive, he'd done a lot. I think he'd even interned with Goldman Sachs. And I mean, Goldman Sachs is a world beater when you talk about investment banking. And I work for an investment bank. So he said everything. He even said he Googled me. I mean, and when he was done, that was fine. And then the Legon guy came. He was also very sharp, but he was much more nuanced, he seemed more balanced. He seemed almost differential. And when he was done, I just picked the phone and called the other manager and asked, so what's your choice? And we said the same thing at the same time, the Legon guy. and the funny thing, I've trained outside, and I should have gone for the Ashesi gentleman, and I love Ashesi. That's why I'm an agent of Ashesi. But that day, he actually rubbed me the wrong way. For all his talk of achievements, I know he wasn't boasting, but the body language was almost condescending. And I was thinking, do I really want this guy on the team? Because it's a team thing. And it was more about himself and what he'd done. And it just rubbed us both. And we both of us agreed. I mean, we didn't even debate it. And so we went for the Legon guy. But I think that story summarizes it. How do you do the code switching? You have to be deeply sensitive to the culture of the organization and the broader culture that you're operating in. If you're going to operate in Ghana, high context environment, you need to be very aware of that. I mean, I still, and I hope none of my non-Ashesi grads are here, those who work with me, I still am very prejudiced where Ashesi students are concerned. So they're always my first option, because they are proactive, they think out of the box, etc. But those who have made it with us are those who tick these boxes. They are very nuanced. And so they come in, they are factual with their achievements, like Neat touted. I mean, don't hide about what you've done. But when you're talking to us, don't seem even, and you know that language, what you say is just about 15, 20%, the body language, the way you go about it. So tone down the way you are communicating. I mean, I can tell somebody the person has a bad odor in a way that will let the person get very angry. But I can also say it in a way that will let the person be happy. What I notice about some Ashesi students is that body language, it's almost at the point of being slightly arrogant. And the sad thing is that they don't even know. So don't compromise your values. I mean, yes, there's only one truth. Don't compromise your values. Continue being assertive, but you have to be nuanced. I mean, and don't just come in thinking that you are the young guy who can shoot straight from the hips, and so you are all that. No. I mean, in this part of the world, we don't look at things that way. So be very nuanced, stay humble. I was chatting with HR the other day. She shared my sentiment. She said, look, be humble enough, even if you feel you know the whole world, you know everything about what we are going to do in investment banking. Be humble enough to listen, be humble enough to want to learn, and then be humble enough to speak up. And if you adopt those, I think that the code switching is a bit easier. I hope I've answered the question
and I would actually like all our panelists to take this up before we move to our Q&A. How do you effectively, thank you very much, Mr. Siedu. How do you effectively code switch? How do you understand? You've talked about understanding the cultural context of that workplace, right? Of that environment. We said it, but how do you do it, right? Without assuming that people know the how. And maybe, Mr. Siedu, you can start, and each panelist, I really want you to respond to the how you do it, right? If my body language is going to rub someone off the wrong way, even though what is coming out of my mouth, it's the fact and actually is the truth, how do I do it to be able to fit into that cultural context? How do I even understand that cultural context in the first place?
You wanted me to go first, right?
Yes, please. Yes,
I mean, it's
because we started that conversation.
Only a recap of what I've said, and I'll use a real life example of an Ashesi alum where I work right now. What she does, and we love her to bits, what she does is that she's very sharp. She's not being noisy about it. But sometimes when we're in a team meeting and she realizes that somebody in another department is deficient with answers, then she sends a gentle email and says, Alex, what do you think about our doing it this way? I'm volunteering to do these reports for you. And it was actually marketing reports with graphs. And she started and talked. So she didn't do it loudly as in talking down at the person who was deficient. She just sent a sidebar, and it was a very nice way. And again, it wasn't condescending. It was more, well, I think it can be done this way. So what do you think? It wasn't, so let's do it this way. So what do you think? And we bought into it. And that's how she's been approaching it. She's been respectful of the environment. She's not loud. She's not arrogant, but it's obvious that she's sharp. She's factual about what she has done. And so we all know that she's done a lot of things, but she's more nuanced with it. And she's quieter with her approach. And I'm using the word quiet with qualification. I'm not saying everybody should be, but again, if you're going to work here, then so be nuanced about it, be factual about it. And she's very assertive. The other day, she had a little problem with her boss, and she stood her ground at the meeting without being rude, and she was polite. And again, to speak to Nee's point, she was just throwing in the facts. The facts. I mean, the truth doesn't lie. The facts don't lie. And so factual, nuanced, assertive, don't compromise your values. If you do that, and if you do that and you try and understand the environment, you won't always get it right all the time. But don't let it be said that there goes that Ashesi, that arrogant Ashesi kid. With her, we say, wow, really nice. And she was at Ashesi, and she's good.
Thank you. Thank you. Nee, what will be your response to this? You know, the how is what we are looking now at. How do we do the code switching?
Given that I would imagine that many of the students listening in are currently, active students who are not yet graduated. In whether
We have some
you're
alums also.
Oh, and some alum. Okay, well,
Yeah.
regardless of whether you're in school, out of school, research is the most important thing you can do ahead of going into interview situation to understand the culture of the employer you're going to be applying to or interviewing with. Um, if it is a multinational company, perhaps it's based in a European country or it's an American HQ, then it's quite possible that the framework, the lens through which they're going to be assessing the candidates might be through the lens of the home country that the multinational is based in. So of course, you'd know more by doing the research. It's possible that there's a local filter that is applied or added to what's going on because they are on the ground, but it's quite possible that the home country will influence the characteristics that they seek. And so informational interviews are one of the best tools that an undergraduate or a professional has to learn more about any employer they plan to work for. So get as many informational interviews as you can before going in for interview with any particular company. This is your opportunity to ask those direct questions about the culture, about the dynamics of communication, about the expectations when it comes to interviewing and presenting yourself and navigating that workplace successfully. That's what you want to find out beforehand in order to apply it to your own presentation when you get in front of someone. So you can modify, you can filter, you can massage your tone, how it is you present yourself in order to come across as best as possible to an individual across the table. And so don't get me wrong, this isn't about being a complete shapeshifter and that you're two completely different people from interview to interview. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is, to Alex's point, what are the nuances of the environment that you are finding yourself within? Can you find a way to stay authentic to yourself in terms of how you normally present, but just, turn the dial a little bit to adjust up or down how loud you are, for lack of a better word, in your presentation. If it's a very buttoned up culture, then you might want to be a little bit more restrained in how you present yourself. If it's a more free flowing culture, then go a little bit more wild and be out there and be more effusive in how you communicate. But you've got to read the room. And then also you can do all the research you like, but at the end of the day, you got to read the person in front of you. At the end of the day, it is a human connection and about establishing a rapport with the individual across the table. And so when it comes to interview best practices, trying to mirror the actions and the posture of the person interviewing you is one of the basic kind of tried and true methodologies to build a rapport and connection. And so if someone is, much more restrained, then you might do the same. If someone's leaning back and relaxing, you don't necessarily as the interviewee go like this, but you can be a bit more relaxed in how you engage in the conversation. And so there's a bit of body language code switching, which is kind of what I spoke about just now. But then in terms of how you discuss, who you are, what you bring to the table, that can be adapted. So again, to Alex's point, arrogance, I think we all know what arrogance looks like. And that's usually not a good thing in a job interview. And so if you can picture a person to be very arrogant, just don't do that. And you should probably be fine. And so there's a way to, tell a story in which you are the prime, the key protagonist. You put forward certain achievements and it's okay to give credit where credit's due. In conjunction or collaboration with this teammate, we did X. That's totally cool, but don't diminish your role in the achievement. I was in charge of this phase or this piece of the project. I executed this, which built into this larger picture of what the project was about. And we accomplished this as a team, but this was my portion, which I executed well. And so the ways to situate, again, context, as Millicent was saying, situate your achievements in context. It could be solo context or team context, but you, again, just read the room and try your best to introduce it in a way that doesn't, step into territory that is bragging or being arrogant, and you're just being straightforward and sharing your story.
Awesome. Jessica, how does this look like? The how, beyond the you should do it this way, how do you do it? How do you test and understand the context and effectively code switch to your advantage?
I think both Mr. Alex and me have said a lot, but one thing that I will add as well is where you have the opportunity, especially when it comes to, say, for example, if I'm just thinking about the context of interns that have come from Ghana or Nigeria to come and do an internship and are coming back full time, If you can find someone in your team or in your wider team that understands your cultural sort of, should I say, where you're coming from. So what some of the things that I term it as cultural mentors, who can help you really start to think about what team are you going into? How does the team operate? What's their view on, achievements as a team? As a leader of a team, more of a we person versus an I person, trying to think through that. I think that would be helpful if you have the opportunity. Some organizations do give buddies as well, but look to see if you can find someone that basically is coming from your background in the current role that you're going into. That's definitely one way that I would say people can do it. But I think all of the other points that Nee and Alex have mentioned are very, relevant as well.
Yeah.
You can also do.
I'm gonna just pick up on from where you stopped, right? Ask a cultural mentor. How do you do it, right? Many a times we give all of these, open statement, do this, ask this, do that. How, right? It's where we lack, where most students don't have the confidence, especially if you come from an environment where you are not used to asking, right? How do you do the asking when you get into this space? If you can just briefly tell us or give us an example of the how to do the asking, I think would be really useful to most of our students on this platform.
No, sure. I think one way you can ask is usually the recruiter that is onboarding you onto the call. Again, think about it, the recruiter is representing the organization. And so at that stage of onboarding you, they want to be able to provide you with all of the resources that you would need to be successful. So the recruiter is the first point of call. I would usually say, if you can, once, just say, in a simple email, or if it's a conversation, to say, I am, obviously this is my background. I just wanted to know if you got any other people within your firm that may have similar experiences to me. It would be good to connect with them ahead of joining, just to get some, to get to connection and networking. I would say that's one way. The other way, where you have, I think thankfully in Ashesi, I think that I also used, was I went to the career services and I said, do you know any alums that work in this place that I'm going to? If yes, could you mind connecting me with people like that? Or the other option is also just check on LinkedIn, most of the time. And if you've had a previous, or one of the things I've seen people do quite well is, even before they come in full-time as interns, when they get an offer, they try and figure out, okay, who within the organization is working in, say, global markets or investment banking, that I may be able, that either from the same school or just something that connects, that we can connect on, but I can drop a quick LinkedIn message. And I know most people are actually quite open to doing that. It's just say, hi, this is my name. I'm an incoming intern in your line of business, and I just wanted to speak with you about ABCD. And I think most people would be able to. I don't know if there's any other options. Alex, it'd be good to hear what are the ways that you or Judith as well. What other ways you think of?
I think I'm gonna hand it
Thank you. Sorry. So
Judith,
yeah,
Judith,
Jessica, you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alex.
No, listen, you finished now. No. So Jessica, you hit the nail right on the head. What I have found useful for the younger grads who come by is that they can actually ask, and this is after the recruitment process. It's effective when you ask directly. I mean, walk up to me and say, look, Alex, or look, Irene, I'm new here. I want somebody to be my mentor, and can you assist? And it's much as this is supposed to be a high context environment and you need to go through the hoops, etc. There are also quite a number of people who are pretty open. I mean, really, there's a bit of convergence now. I mean, in terms of the cultural nuances in both high and low context. So there are actually people, it's okay to go ahead and ask, I want you to mentor me. I want you to walk with me, at least in the initial stages, and what I need to be doing, what I need not to be saying, what I need to be saying. And that works. There are a good number of good people out there who are willing to help people navigate the corridors. So just going ahead to is useful.
Yeah.
ask.
And just to add on that,
And of course, let me add one important caveat. Don't, I mean, open your eyes. In Ghana, we call, and there's something that, there's something that we like to say in Akan. It says, "Ifienyansa, common sense." Apply common sense. So the first few days you were there.
Street smartness, huh?
Yes, yes. You should know the people you should be asking. I mean, really. So that's about it. But go ahead and ask.
Okay,
and be
awesome.
clear what you want from them as well, because then that makes it easier for them to know how they're helping you. Yeah.
Okay, Judith, and then we would open up. If you have any questions, our participants, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A. After Judith is done, I'm going to hand over to Vanessa to walk us through the questions. So if you have any questions, this is the time to put it in the Q&A. And if you want to speak directly also, indicate it and Vanessa would prompt you to speak. So Judith, how do you effectively code switch? The how is what we're exploring now.
Yeah. And well, I mean, what everybody has said has been, mostly what I would say anyways about, once you are onboarding or, you've started the job, yes, ask people. For sure, ask people, find out what is the culture here, what is, how do we do, how do you do things around here? How can I fit into this team, for example? Get guidance from the team members who have been with the company for longer. But I wanted to just mention something about code switching from the point of view of language. Because a lot of people are bilingual, multilingual, speak a lot of languages. And so it's also in, linguistics or multilingual, multicultural terms, it's also called translanguaging. And so a lot of studies have been done on this in countries that are officially bilingual. So like Canada, but also, Finland, a lot of other countries too. So anyways, what it can be, well, you can be a real asset to the company if you are able to speak more than one language, and you can then look at the nuances of the language. We talked about nuances in the workplace, but nuances, and maybe you could express something better in one language or the other, or another language, but you could exploit, the nuances from the languages that you know. And so you can be a real asset in the workplace for other employees, perhaps even your boss, because I know we've got Google Translate now, but I was just reading an article about this, and somebody in the workplace was just saying, well, Google Translate, but Google Translate doesn't understand the cultural nuances very well. So yeah, but knowing when to do this code switching, knowing which, when it's appropriate to, use one or the other languages. That's something that you would find out, obviously, asking questions, observing, seeing what's happening. So yeah, I just thought I'd mention that. It's a little bit different from what everyone else said, but I, totally agree with what everyone is saying. So
absolutely. And I remember back in grad school, one of my favorite courses that I took was International Human Resource Management, and we watched a movie on outsourced, right? And it talked about the various cultural nuances in the US, but also in India, and how, the US team will go and cross their legs and will be showing under their foot, their shoes, and these Arabs were totally scandalized by, that. And this American wouldn't even recognize he had no clue what was going on, right? And why they were behaving the way they were behaving. They sat on the floor, they were ready to give coffee and do small talks before going into the contract. And he was irritated by the time that he thought they were wasting, right? And all boiled down to the context and understanding that context that you're going to do the business, that context that you're going to work, right? That team dynamics, where are your team members from? What typically will be their nuance, and the importance of coming, out and having a common understanding of how whatever you are going to work on would look like. for you and not making assumptions, right? So at this point, I think it will be a really good point to hand over to Vanessa. Vanessa, do we have any questions? If we do, please go ahead and ask our questions now.
Okay, thank you, Millicent, and thank you to all our panelists. So we do have a few questions, but before I get to the questions, please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A section or request to ask out loud by raising your hand. Okay, so to the questions that we have, there are a few questions around the idea of social media and how do we put ourselves out there on professional platforms like LinkedIn and be visible without sounding boastful or as though we are bragging? And I guess as a follow-up to that, how do we market ourselves and our skills on social media, just to make sure that we're being noticed, but we're also being noticed without sounding proud?
And any of you can take a stab at it.
Yeah, I can jump in on this one as someone who has to live on LinkedIn as part of my job. Basically, I think there are two main ways of engaging in self-promotion on LinkedIn that doesn't have to come anywhere close to sound like you're bragging. Number one is to engage with the content that others produce by leaving a comment. The lowest common denominator, which we all do, is to like something, right? We're very used to that on Instagram, on Facebook. That is helpful to an author of content as far as maybe getting their post promoted a bit further, but you haven't left any value with the author by just doing a like. They don't know what you liked about their piece. And so a great way to showcase how you think, what you understand about the industry or the field, or just to add your own perspective, is to leave a value added comment on someone's content. So they put out, a piece about, oh, I think the economy is going to go this way. Then you as the economics, student or graduate can give a response to what they posted, either agreeing, adding your own 2 cents as to why you agree, disagreeing respectfully, saying why you think it's going to go a different way, but you're adding in a value added way to the conversation, and people will see your comment and will hopefully engage, including the author. So this is a wonderful way to get the attention of employers you're trying to work for eventually. There's going to be someone manning their social media, and you might be someone who repeatedly leaves very wonderful, intelligent, insightful comments, and you might gain notice and traction with that company because you're always paying attention and feeding into what they're talking about. A great thing to do with individuals you'd like to connect with as well. Again, value-added comments. The second way is to produce content on your own. This is either posting an article that someone else wrote, but adding your own analysis of it. So this could be you pulling out what the key takeaways were for you from the article that you read and putting them in the body of the post. It could be a question you were left with after reading through the article that you would like to discuss further with people and throwing out there. It could be you disagreeing completely with the article and saying why you think differently about that. All these things are examples of you putting out your thought leadership in the world. And it doesn't have to be as grandiose as having, a whole fully researched, paper ready to go to back yourself up. This is you, showing how you think through your questions, your comments, and how you add value to conversation. And then finally, you could put out your own content, whether that's writing a full article on LinkedIn or writing a small post, which is 1,300 characters on LinkedIn as well. And so those are ways that you can discuss, and showcase your thought leadership. You can talk about your achievements on LinkedIn as well. If you just graduated, there are a lot of graduation posts, these days. If you got a new certification, you can share excitement in the certification. A wonderful way that I learned, and I'm not taking credit for this, is if you can communicate a lesson you learned in achievement, that makes your achievement useful to others. And so I, solved this big, gigantic problem. This is how I did it. This is a lesson I learned. Yes, you cited an achievement, but you also shared with other people how they can do it as well and what your takeaways were. So those are a few ways to do things on social media that can, especially LinkedIn, to put yourself out there, and the key things to add value. If your goal in producing content is to help others, that's a wonderful way to gain notice, gain traction, be seen as useful and helpful, and you're building your brand as someone who has insightful, helpful content for people to consume, and that'll help elevate your profile over time and give you a good reputation. That's what we all want on social media.
and Nee, not to put you on the spot, but Nee is actually on this panel because I saw his article, right, that he wrote about this very topic. And I was like, he needs to talk to my students, right? And so I reached out to him and we had a conversation and he graciously agreed to be here. So 100% beyond liking, say something, right? Put your mind, your thoughts, your perspective about things out there, and you never know. I may just invite you to be on the next panel. Who knows, right?
Yeah. You never know who's
But
watching.
anyone else, you never know who is watching, right? I don't think Nee was thinking about Ashesi or, this conversation when he wrote that very insightful post. But he's actually talking from experience about not just liking, because most of the time that's our default, right? We'll give it a thumbs up, we'll give a nice heart, we'll give it a smiley face, and we leave it. But that doesn't say anything, right? I always tell my students, if people are doing presentations and you're giving them feedback, don't just say nice presentation. That doesn't mean anything. What is nice about the presentation, right? If you give a thumbs up in the chat box for someone who is doing a presentation, that doesn't mean anything. So I'm always pushing them to what does it mean, right? That is what will be useful to the person, but also that helps you to put yourself out there. Annie?
Okay, thank you so much, Nee. So we have Stuart Mangezi, who has his hand raised. Stuart, I'm going to unmute your mic so that you can speak. Go ahead, Stuart.
All right, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much to all the speakers for the insightful conversation that they just had. My question follows up on Nee's recent answer that she just gave. I'm really concerned about expressing views, especially on social media. Doesn't that also put you at the risk that the employers will sort of like, if they align with particular views that you probably don't align to, won't that probably put you in a space that is not in a favorable position with the employer or whomever you're going to be interacting with?
Sure. That's a great question. And, the challenge is, what views it is that you're putting out, right? I think that it's important for all of us as individuals to take a stand on things that we find to be important and align with our values. So, for example, I am living in the United States as a Black man, as an African. Racial justice is very important to me. And so even though it feels risky at times, admittedly so, I will post about, the George Floyd case. I wrote a post about that on Wednesday and the result of it and what I'm thinking, how I'm feeling. I don't want an employer who doesn't align with those values. So ultimately, I don't care if they are put off by my comments because I wouldn't want to work for them anyway. And so if you are taking a stand on things that are socially, again, this is open to interpretation, but socially correct, if you're on the right side of things, I don't think it should be a problem for you to put out your views. If it gets into, deep political territory, yes, it can be challenging. And so you do want to tread carefully. Religion, politics, those are things that, can be challenging to discuss in the public square. But I think that if you are putting out an authentic viewpoint that is respectful, considered, and isn't trying to knock anyone down in the process of you expressing yourself, I think it's a way you can move forward in a public square like social media and put out a stance that, again, it demonstrates your values. And so if you are looking at employers who align with your values, there shouldn't be a problem whatsoever. And that might even be a bonus in your column because you're able to be public about those views and are taking principled stances on things that are important to you. So if it's advocating for, women's rights and them not being, sexually assaulted, who's going to argue with that? Do you want to work for an employer who's down with that? No. So go ahead and talk about it. So there's several examples that we go into. But I think that, again, if you are taking principled stances, being respectful, and standing by your values, that should be an attractive quality in today's workplace for an employee to have. And you'll hopefully, you know, like attracts like, and that'll hopefully bring people your way who think similarly to you and would align with your perspective that you want to work for.
Yeah, if I can add one thing, I think it's about how you go about, you know, sharing your views versus the what that you're sharing. And it's really important. If again, it's respectful, I think a lot of people would value that. I have an example of having gone through one of our road shows, and one of off the back of the road shows, one of the MDs got a LinkedIn message from a student who disagreed with a certain part of the presentation that we did during the interview, but it was how the person went about saying, I disagree with the, you know, the point that you made, and coming up with, you know, this is why I disagree. This is, you know, in my view, this is what it is. And interesting enough, the person actually, the MD was very impressed. And I think that was one of the reasons why the person made it through to a second round of interview. People value you when you have a voice and when you use your voice in the right way. So I think don't be shy about doing it. It's how you go about doing it and not what you actually say. Yeah.
Judith and Alex, I don't know if you want to add anything about social media, right? And how we communicate our achievements on social media in a way that is advantageous to us.
Well, I was going to add something, and then Jessica kind of summarized it. So I was just going to say, yes, I mean, you actually have no business working with an institution that doesn't align with your values. Values don't change, cultural contexts change, but values don't change. The truth does not change. And so if you stand for something, don't be shy about it. You have no business working where your values don't align. So that's what Lee said. But again, like Jessica said, it is the how you communicate. I mean, the how is truly important, especially in high context environments, I guess in low context environments. So just make sure that you do it in a polite, not insulting way. You're stating your points, and that's that. And again, like Jessica said, funny enough, bosses actually like such people who are not afraid to be heard in a nice, polite way. And you'll probably get a call from them.
Awesome. Judith, anything from your end?
Yeah, well, I was just going to add that, yeah, definitely, you know, it's how you say it, how you frame it, okay, the discourse that you use, but also showing that maybe you have analyzed it, and you have some reasons why you have this, you know, opinion about something. It's not just an opinion off the top of your head, but you can show that you've done some real critical thinking about this. And this is why you are maybe diverging from somebody else's point of view. So that also demonstrates, you know, your analytical skills.
I like that. I like that, being demonstrating that you thought it through and not just disagreeing for disagreeing's sake, right? Now, I have a very interesting question here, which reminds me, years back, I used to, in my multiple hats that I've worn in my life, I used to work in the international office at the University of Minnesota, right? And we would prepare international students for whenever we have a career fair. And I remember this Chinese students going through, we usually will give them some tips here and there, some cheat sheets, right? And we went through everything, and he had scripted everything, and it got to, we were done. For me, we have done a run through for a typical interview. And then he was like, but you didn't ask me this question, right? And I was like, it's not automatic that the employer is gonna ask every single one of these, you know, questions on the script. But we have a participant asking that, what if you're at that job interview and they never ask you about your achievement, right? Do you walk away with all your amazing achievement without letting it know? Do you go and say, hey, by the way, I've done all of these amazing things? How do you go about it if you don't get that opportunity at the interview to talk about your achievements?
I can start. I think one of the ways that a lot of students or people off the back of interviews tend to send thank you emails, you know, to to people that have interviewed them. I think that's where you can reiterate, because again, I always say you're stating to them why they should hire you. Most of the time, or most likely, they would have indicated in their job description the skill set they're looking for, right? So that's where you can say, lovely to meet you today. It was great conversation around, and make sure, don't just say great conversation, make sure you actually remember what you talked about, because you want to make an impact. And then just say, reiterating my skills, you know, ABC, we say that it's communication and it's teamwork skills. That's where you can put 1 or 2 bullet points. Again, don't write a whole paragraph as to why, you know, all of that. But that's the point where you can, if you weren't asked in the interview, to just get the recruiter or the manager thinking about you again, to say, okay, just summarizing, we had a good conversation, but these are 3 of the reasons why I'm the best candidate for the job. I think that's a good point that you can do it. I have seen in situations where students want to answer the question they prepared versus the question you're asking them. Try not to do that in the interview because you prepared it so much. You're like, I really want to say it now. But again, I think Nee mentioned it, and I think Alex mentioned, read the room. You know, if that question is not coming up, then that's not the point to use it. And obviously at the end, you know, you can put that in a very short, you know, less than 200 word something email, just to reiterate why you are the best person for the job, basing it on the skill set that they highlighted on their job description.
Any other takers on this?
Yeah, just to piggyback off of Jessica's, you know, really great, pardon me, really great advice. Though I was only in the Ghanaian education system for about 2 years, I know that Chumpor is, you know, the way that Ghanaian students are taught, and many African students are taught. And it doesn't leave a lot of room for creativity or adaptation, you know, on the fly. And that's where you can really fall into trouble in an interview situation. And so the advice that I give is to don't memorize, but internalize your answers. And so the difference is memorization is rote. It's exactly as it was. Your intention is to spit it back out that way. That doesn't work in an interview if the question is framed differently than how you practiced it, or if the question doesn't come at all. But if you internalize your answers, it means you know the moving parts of your story well enough that no matter how the question is asked to you, you can enter into it in the way that is necessary to give a good response. And so that can be really helpful for you not to feel tied to a script, but to be able to be adaptive in communicating with the person across from you what your benefits and assets are. Again, to Jessica's advice about the job description, that is your cheat sheet for the job and what they're looking for. And so if someone doesn't necessarily explicitly ask you what are your achievements, the whole purpose of an interview is to demonstrate how you can do what they're asking you to do in the job description. And so in your preparation, that might be mapping, okay, they want me to have, you know, great data analysis skills. Okay, well, when I was at Ashesi, I had a data analysis project in this particular class. I did X, Y, Z and drew these conclusions and leveraged data to do something, right? That is you showing that skill in action in the context that you did it as an Ashesi student, for example, and are speaking directly to the needs of the employer. It's not bragging. It's not, you know, unwarranted or unnecessary information. You're serving to them what they need to know to assess you as a candidate for the job. And you can do so regardless of if they ask you directly or not. Your job is to sell yourself. So just go into the meeting knowing that you need to provide some level of information about what you can do in regards to job posting.
Okay. Annie, do we have any more questions?
Yes, we do. So actually, there's a follow-up question to this conversation. One of our audience wants to know, when answering the tell me about yourself question, can you highlight some of your achievements, even if you're not asked?
Yes, like 1,000,000%, yes.
That's
Yeah.
actually a very good time, right?
Yeah.
No, definitely, exactly. I've had I'm just give 2 examples where tell me about yourself. Someone starts talking about their family history. That's not the time to talk about that. That's the time that you want to talk about the things that you've done, right? And I always say that question really drives the rest of the interview, because most of the time it's the first question they would ask you. So if you are, again, going back to the job description and figuring out what are the things that they are most hoping to get out of you or to hear from you, you can be able to frame that, you know, 45 seconds, 60 seconds in such a way that you are already preempting some questions they're going to talk about and you're answering it there. And that way the interview goes, I would say, in your way, because you're a bit more comfortable, because again, you've internalized what you want to share with them, and they're asking you questions based on what you said. So that's the perfect place to start in terms of talking about your skills, because most of, like, when I interview, most of the time it's the first question that I would ask, or maybe the second question after you try and ease the nerves on the call. But again, that's the right place to do that. Yeah.
Okay. And so Jessica, there's a follow-up question with regards to reiterating your achievements in an email. So it says, how can you reiterate your achievements in an email without it seeming off? How do you get to do this in a way that flows easily as opposed to sounding like you're pushing it on the person?
I think if you go off the back of the conversation you had, then it's much more, it's natural. You just had that conversation and you're basically stating, what the points that you made, and adding one or two additional points as well. So don't, if you didn't discuss, if you didn't discuss a certain thing, I'd say maybe not necessarily put it in there, because then it may feel like, actually, maybe you should, depending on how it's linked to it as well. But I'd say try not to, again, if you're going back, that's why I say when you're having a conversation on interview, it's two ways. They're interviewing you, you're interviewing them. So you have to make sure that you're taking notes of that conversation so that when you go back, you have concrete things to write about, right? So if you're saying, and easy, I say easy, but maybe it's not easy to some people. You could just say, thanks for your, for speaking earlier, based on our conversation. We talked about my, I'm actually, I'm going black now, but basically, talk about the discussion, and put one or 2 points. And one of the reasons why I said keep it short and sweet is most likely, the other person will respond and then the conversation kicks off. So then you've got other opportunities for you to say more as well. But I think, don't try and make it inauthentic. Just go off the back of the conversation and listen when you're being interviewed, and the questions as well, because that makes it easier for you to reiterate things on email.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. So we have a question from Mike. Mike says, I'm a polyglot, Spanish, English, and French, working in the Ghanaian civil service. The general environment expects you to fall in line with regards to not saying too much and not being able to question procedures or protocols. The few times I and a few of my colleagues have tried, we've been given templated answers like, that's how it is, or don't worry about it. How can I add on to my value as a worker in these conditions?
Maybe Alex should take this.
Yeah, but I don't work in the public service.
I know.
I'll answer that because yes, this comes up quite a bit. For me, the first thing I'll do is to ask myself, what really is my purpose? Because I'm not working just for working's sake. I'm working to create change if I can. And so if I'm trying to, if the working environment, it's the, in Ghana, we call that environment the MBA environment, meaning I've been here for long, so nothing is changing. So if you're working in an MBA environment and they just like telling you this is how it's done, and you've tried once or twice, you've ticked all the boxes, you've tried to find a mentor to try and see whether the person can help you navigate and create change, that's not working. You've spoken to the boss or a few high-ups, it's not working. You've tried doing things out of the box, say you've tried to find a solution and gone up to them, say, hey, surprise, I found a solution, what do you think? And it's not working. At a point, it means that your purpose is not being fulfilled there. Then you have to leave, really. Because if at a point you are not able to leave, or you're not able to do what you went there to do, in this part, I don't want to say this part of the world, but in those environments, you become part of the furniture. And if you're not careful about it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, another young Ashesi grad will come and you'll be behaving the same way to him or her as they've been behaving towards you. So if you're not fulfilling your purpose and you've tried those tick boxes and it's not working, get out. You'll get another job. Or you will be able to create the change you want to create in another way. Sorry, I didn't have a solution you wanted.
Annie, do we have any more questions?
Yes, we have a number actually. So one of our participants would like to know, is there a book that our panelists would recommend that could help in the journey of healthy self-promotion?
And I must add that we have a number of resources that we will share once we are done. And if the panelists have any, we will add on. I'll say type in and we'll add it to our resources. But right away, I don't know if you have any suggestions, right? Judith, you have done all the research.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a book on this though, but I'll see. I want to say to Niato that I was very, very happy to read the link you sent to his article. That was really good.
Oh,
So
thank you. I
we should
appreciate
share that with everybody. Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the compliment. I can jump in. I have a book recommendation. I was able to hear a talk from a woman named Carla Harris. She's a current, I think, a VP or senior vice president at JP Morgan. And the name of the book is Strategize to Win. And she also has another one called Expect to Win. It's a series, and both of them are about adapting your mindset and useful techniques to advance within the workplace. And her framework is really interesting because in her talk with us, she spoke about how to be your authentic self, and she added an element that I hadn't quite considered. There's this debate about, being your full authentic self or not being full authentic self based on the environment. And what she shared is that you don't have to be 100% everything all at once, right? So to make that feel a bit more real, you can be your funny self when the situation calls for it. You can be your analytical self when the situation calls for it. Those are all genuine, authentic parts of who you are, but you don't have to bring everything to every situation. So it's about being intelligent in how you deploy who you are based on what the situation is. And so I think that lends into the conversation that we're having in terms of, pardon me, bringing your full self, but it's aspects of yourself that are relevant to the environment that you're in at the time, and still being your true self, but it's not everything at once. I thought that was an interesting nuance to consider, because it's not an all or nothing when you're interacting with people. You're not going to be the same way you are with your sister as you are with a potential employer. And so but both parts of you, of those parts of you, are all true and they're all real. So it's about deployment.
Right.
But I think she covers some of that in the book, in these two books.
Okay, so maybe this will be a good time to share the resources to our audience, Annie. And whilst we do that, I think we'll take one very last question. Unfortunately, we are not able to go through all the questions because I really want our team, our expert panel, to give their final closing thoughts and skill, any competence, any advice that you can give, right, to us. So we'll take the final, someone's hand is up. I don't know who that is.
Yes, so it's Dalali Zumanu. You can unmute your mic and speak, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. So it was an issue about somebody talking about working in the public sector and having issues in there. And Alex, who is a very, very good friend of mine, who should have been telling us what his experience is with the public sector, rather chose to run away from the question, but that's fine. I happen to consult a lot with the public sector, and I had the same thinking that public sector was weak, public sector was lazy, public sector was time wasting. But to be very honest with you, I have done quite some work with public sector, especially the Ministry of Finance. And my whole idea about public sector and the kind of things I heard about them really had to change, because I met very, very intelligent, very results-oriented, very smart guys. I mean, all across the board. It's not like just one person out of the many. I mean, for me, having dealt with them all these years, some kind of understanding of what they're about, and the private sector, they're able to critique and analyze private sector write-up that does not come anywhere near what is expected of it. And so I like to just let people understand that sometimes it's what mindset you take into these setups. You know, sometimes you get to think that, oh, okay, they said the public sector or the ministries, they are no good, they are lazy. No, 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 no. I have experienced them. I currently do some work in my PhD thesis, and I'm looking at public sector, and I can tell everybody listening this evening that I think it's mindset, is the way we have perceived them over the years. And I think that that mindset is totally old now. And the public sector that I have experienced is one that I have always been appreciative of because of the kind of capacity and the kind of work that I have seen them do and I've put up. So I think it's mindset. Thank you very much.
I'm glad you effectively stepped in, you know, to advocate and help us to understand. Thank you very much, Delali. And at this point, I'm gonna go around to invite each of our panelists to give their closing remarks. And I'll start with Judith, because before you do that, there was a question that I was gonna, you know, dismiss, but I think it's very important that our audience, you know, who has this question is asking, does this apply to all work contexts? So he was specific to say that everything we've discussed here, assuming I'm working with a research firm, I'm working in academia, I'm working, you know, not in your high industry, private sector, competitive environment where I had to prove, if I'm working on my own as an entrepreneur and all of that, does this personal branding, personal advocacy matter, right? And then you can add your closing remarks.
So I'm not sure whether there has really been you know, I'm looking at it from a research perspective or even from my personal knowledge about this. I'm not sure from research if there has been anything done. And I think this would be a great, you know, research project to investigate, because usually all the research is done in larger, well, it could be SMEs, you know, small and medium-sized enterprises, but looking at, you know, a family enterprise or, you know, you know, an entrepreneur starting out to find out about, you know, do these, you know, how do these cultural contexts, you know, the high context, low context, or obviously if you're, you know, the country that you're working in, because that is going to be your cultural context, that will have an influence on you. But how much does it influence you personally, or how much does your personal, you know, the way you do work, how much does that influence the, well, the way you work or the way you approach other people? Yeah, I don't think I have an answer to that, because I don't know whether, as I said, there's any research on this. So
yeah, and I mean, if I will share, it took me a long time, you know, to put out my thoroughly researched. I mean, I burned the midnight candle. It gets published in a really high impact journal, and I'm not ready to put it out there. It took me a long time to even share my research work, you know, with fellow faculty to say, hey, here is my latest publication, right? I know my dean, for instance, would have a come to Jesus conversation with me and say, listen, I'm putting this out there. And I would almost always negotiate, no, you don't have to do that. And I have quite a number of colleagues who will do that, right? So even in the academic setting as faculty, do you still see that you have to advocate and push and put yourself out there? Does it matter, you know, or this only matters when it comes to industry?
yeah, I agree with you. I think, you know, we really have to try and push ourselves, and especially as women, women faculty as well, because I found this too, you know, trying to go up for a promotion and you show that you've done everything that, you know, your male colleague has done. You have the same sort of, you know, publications, the same teaching and the same research, and you've had research grants and I don't know what all. And in the end, the male gets promoted and you don't because you're a female. Or it could be a question, you know, depending on the country too. I mean, the United States, you know, we're looking at racialization and all that sort of thing too, because I lived in the United States for 6 years, just moved back to Canada. So I saw a lot of this happening too. I really think that, yeah, we have to really try to promote ourselves. Otherwise I have seen statistics on women in sort of economics faculties, women in economics faculties. This is in the UK. And they get paid, it's somewhere around 6 or 10% less than the men. Same quality qualifications, same level, you know, of teaching, and it's difficult for academics.
All right. Okay. Well, Jessica, Alex, what will be your final closing remarks? And I love the point you made about you are the one looking for the job. You can't bring your entire village or your clan to the interview to come and speak for you. You would have to speak for yourself, right? What will be your closing remarks?
Sure. I think that dovetailing off what Judith was saying about self-promotion, I've come to learn that everything in life is sales to a certain degree. And we all have to gain some level of comfort with it because it's ever present. Whether it's convincing your friends to go to a certain restaurant over another, that's sales. Whether it is, trying to put forward a new idea, as the gentleman was saying, within his public service environment and trying to get the higher ups to buy in, that's sales. Getting a job is sales, and so on and so forth. And so it's something that we can't really escape. So it's about finding a way that is the most authentic to us, to do it in a way that will connect with others and come across as being true. And so part of that is professional branding. What is it you have to offer to others? Your brand is really a promise about what people can expect to get from you when they interact with you. And you want a positive brand that precedes you, that people want to welcome into the room or into the conversation. Ultimately, in the job search and being a professional, your brand is thinking about this question: what is it that I'm good at, and how do I do it differently from other people? That's your brand. Because no matter your line of work, there are going to be other people who are, equally qualified as you. You perform the same function, but how you personally perform that function versus someone else is the difference maker. So very quickly, if someone in market research that does focus groups, your job is to speak to people, get insights, develop the product. Maybe you are great at asking really, offbeat questions, thought-provoking questions that are not typical of how people conduct their research. That is your flavor on how you do it versus someone else. So it's thinking about that little nuance, that difference that you bring to the table. That's how you can effectively brand yourself and stand apart from other people and develop that a way to showcase the value you add in a way that no one else can, because you're uniquely created and you're one of one. And so always try and run in your own lane versus trying to adopt and be like anyone else, because that's not going to get you a job. It's going to turn into a commodity, and you want to be an individual that stands apart. And so that's what I'll leave everyone with.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Jessica, what will be your closing remarks?
Sure. Just from a employer perspective, I would say that know that employers want to hear about what you've done and what you've achieved, from the the networking sessions through to the interviews, and when you actually get on board as well. So again, really think through, especially in the interview process. I want to hone a little bit more on there, because that's what's going to decide if you get it or not. Is think about how you structure that conversation and how you respond to the questions around achievements. Again, once you're prepared, the job description really is your cheat sheet. I think if you go into an interview and you haven't looked in the job description, I think you're shooting yourself in the foot, because how are you preparing yourself to go and actually say what's present yourself to the employer as the person that they should hire for the job. You want to know what they're looking for, and then you can look in your arsenal of experiences and pick one. One other thing that I would say is, you know, sometimes when you're talking about experiences in interviews, some people just would keep repeating one experience. Again, look at everything you've done. Sometimes one of the things I noticed with students is when they've done something, they don't really, it's difficult sometimes as an individual to be able to articulate the value you created unless someone has pointed that to you as well. So sometimes when you speak to a student during, you know, just a conversation before the interview, they're like, oh, I didn't really do much. But as you start to ask questions, you find out that these are the things that you were able to do. So I would say in your preparation, use your friends, you know, as people to practice on, and to help, you know, do mock interviews as well. Like, you know, try as much as possible to be able to, because I think once you're able to understand that piece and you're comfortable with what you're sharing about yourself, not exactly word for word, when you go into the interview, it reduces your nerves and it allows you to actually be yourself, and be able to bring your differentiating value on board. So employers want to hear about you and your unique experience. So again, go out and share that. And don't just use the templated answers that you see online, because some jobs you will see, they'll say, oh, 100 investment banking questions, and they have answers under it. And then, you know, you come and basically say exactly that. Don't do that. You know, try and, again, going back to context, how does that affect you? And how, what are you going to do differently as well?
Okay, all right. Before we go to Alex, I see that Vanessa has shared our feedback form in the chat box. Kindly, we would really love to get the feedback. So even if you're not doing it now, kindly ensure that you click on that link and give us feedback on how the session went for you. So Alex, over to you. What will be your final closing remarks? Thank you very much, Jessica.
Right, be nuanced. Well, I'm talking about after you've had the job and you started the journey. This is not at the interview stage, it's after the interview stage. Be nuanced when you go about your doings where you work. Be culturally sensitive. Find a mentor if you can. And then do all that without compromising your values. Your values should not change. Then after that, be humble enough to listen. Be humble enough to learn. If you do that, then you're ready to lead. And then my final words are, you know, life is not a transaction. People are not a transaction. People are relational. In this part of the world, remember to be relational. We're not transactions. If you have that mindset, you will pass a cultural test in Ghana.
Awesome. Wow. Life, you're not what, a commodity.
We're not a transaction.
You are not a transaction, right? You're relational, right? Yes. And so the relationship really is the bottom line. I know all of this might sound daunting and a lot of it's seemingly hard work. If I have to be switching from here each time I go into a space, you know, behave differently. How do I put up my authentic self? Can't I just remain who I am and just flow? Well, unfortunately, that's not the world we are in. And exactly is because we are relational, right? And so it just can't be your way or the highway. You are dealing with people, you are dealing in different contexts, and it's very important to bear that in mind as we communicate, and especially as we communicate our achievement for impact. I have had an awesome time. The time just flew by just like that. And I'm sure you all agree that we could go on forever, but we have to end. And so on behalf of the entire Office of Diversity and International Programs team at Ashesi, I would like to say a big thank you to our entire team of panelists who, you know, you've done a great job really unpacking this topic for us. And we hope we can call you back, you know, anytime. But thank you so much for an amazing evening. And everyone who was able to join us, have a great evening. Thank you for joining. Thank you for spending quality time with us this evening. and have a good night. That'll be all from us. Be sure to please complete our evaluation form because we really value your feedback. Have a good night and thank you all. Bye for now.